In the silence of an ancient dream, I found myself standing upon the edge of something unspeakably dreadful. What stretched before me was not merely a valley, but a graveyard without end. It was an open wound in the earth, where death had made its home, and memory had long been abandoned. Bones, bleached by time and cracked by despair, were scattered like forgotten histories across the dust. There was no sign of movement, no whisper of breath. Skeletons formed, sinews wrapped around them. Flesh appeared where only dust had been. Call the wind. Call the Ruach, the divine breath that hovered over the waters in Genesis. That same spirit now hovered over these lifeless forms, waiting for the word. I obeyed again. With authority not my own, I called the breath from the four winds. Breath entered them, and they stood a vast army, not just alive, but alive with destiny. Their eyes burned with something deeper than sight. They had crossed through the veil of death and returned with vision. I stood in awe, not at the spectacle, but at the mercy. For what I saw was not merely resurrection. It was a prophecy of restoration. It was as if time had been reversed, as if God was writing creation backward from death. In the place where death had reigned, the voice of God carved a new beginning. The rattling wasn't just noise. It was the sound of hope finding its way back into history. What once lay forgotten now stood as testimony. God does not abandon what he has spoken over. He rebuilds ruins. He reclaims the lost. He breathes again where breath had ceased, but there was still no breath. They stood, bodies whole but empty, like statues in a silent cathedral. Life had not yet entered, just the heavy presence of absence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill the air, it devours it. This was no ordinary scene of decay. It was as if the whole world had exhaled its last breath here and then gone still forever. I stood, not as an observer, but as a witness chosen to see the unbearable truth. These bones were not anonymous. They had names once, stories, families, hopes. And yet now, they were reduced to relics of regret. The ground itself seemed to mourn. This was the grave of a nation. A people who had once walked in covenant, now reduced to silence. And then, amid the quiet, came the voice of the Lord firm and deliberate. Son of man, can these bones live? The question burned through the desolation. Could what had died so completely be restored? Could what was reduced to fragments of history ever know breath again? Declare life to what has forgotten sound. I obeyed. My voice trembled as I prophesied to death itself. And as the words left my mouth, something shifted. The silence cracked. The dust trembled. A strange sound echoed through the valley a rattling. Bones began to move, to find one another, as if heaven's magnetism was pulling destiny back together. Every part of me wanted to say no. Everything I saw told me resurrection was impossible. And yet, in my spirit, I dared to reply, O sovereign Lord, only you know. And then came the command, not a suggestion, a divine instruction. Prophesy to these bones. Speak to what has no ears. What was once random and forsaken was being drawn into order. Again the voice came, prophesy to the breath, not to the flesh, not to the bones, but to the spirit itself. Come, breath of God, enter these slain. Awaken the hearts buried beneath silence. Fill them with fire and purpose. And then life. What had been only form became force. What had been silence became song. The bones were never too dry. The loss was never too final. The silence was broken, not just by sound, but by revelation. As the wind came and breath returned, the voice of the Lord thundered through the valley, not in condemnation, but in a promise unshakable. These bones, he said, are the whole house of Israel, not merely a metaphor, not just a vision, about anyone who has ever wandered too far, fallen too deep, broken beyond recognition. The bones in that valley represent every heart that has ever whispered, it's too late. It is about the unrelenting grace of a God who resurrects what we thought was forever lost. The same breath that gave life to Adam, the same wind that split the seas, the same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead now moves in the forgotten valleys of your soul. And into that lie, God breathes truth. You shall live. He will return you to identity, to destiny, to covenant. From every direction of heaven, from every edge of divine possibility, the breath rushes in. Even when nothing remains but fragments of who you used to be, He calls you by name. Come alive, He says. Wake up, sleeper. Arise from your grave. The wind is not tired. The breath of God has not run out. What He did in that valley, He still does today. The same Spirit that hovered over the formless deep in the beginning, the very breath that whispered creation into being, is now calling your name in the ruins of your disappointment. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for perfection. It simply fills what was empty. It revives what was dead. It raises what was fallen. What rises from that valley is not merely a crowd of survivors. It is an army. It never was. The bones are rattling. The wind is blowing. And the voice of the Lord is still speaking. The only question is, will you listen? Anointed, empowered, recommissioned, not to exist, but to advance. Not to remain where they stood, but to march in the name of the one who breathed again. Not because you earned it, but because He is faithful, because He said so. Then you shall know that I am the Lord. That's His promise. Not only will He breathe into you, but He will make you stand. Not only will He raise you, but He will root you. Not only will He awaken you, but He will restore you to where you belong. But a message to a people buried beneath the weight of their own history. You with your disappointments. You whose prayers have grown cold. You who've stopped believing restoration is possible. You are the bones. But God is the breath. A nation once chosen, now feeling abandoned. A people once called, now hopeless and scattered. Behold, He declared, I will open your graves, graves of despair, graves of disobedience, graves of shattered identity, and I will raise you from them, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, generationally. God's voice did not speak to the surface. It reached the very depths of the soul. He descends into the tombs we've built within ourselves, into the places where we've buried our faith, our innocence, our calling. And He speaks, not with human hope, but with divine certainty. I will put my Spirit within you. He wasn't just resurrecting bodies. He was resurrecting purpose. This wasn't just about Israel. This was about us. The Spirit of the Lord does not knock politely at the surface of our lives. This is not about human strength reviving itself. It is not about grit or self-help or positive thinking. You shall live, He says, you with your regrets. I will place you in your own land, He says, not just geographically, but spiritually. And so, again, the wind is summoned. Come, breath from the four winds. Even in the valley of complete desolation, where hope lies silent and memory fades into dust, there is one who speaks with power. And the miracle isn't just that life returns. It's that purpose is reborn. The Spirit is not weak. You dry bones, live. You shattered dream, rise. You exiled soul, return. This is not the end.